when I get up there.
And
You want me to start with?
I want you to start with today's date. Today is August 1st of 1994. It's getting on 11:45 or so, and we are in Lavonia, Georgia, at the Franklin County Library in the center of town. And I'm sorry, you'll have to refresh my memory. Sir, I'm speaking with
Bob Dunning.
Bob Dunning. And Mr. Dunning, I'd like to ask you a little of your experiences during the World War II era.
Well, to start out with, I'm not a native of Georgia. I'm a native of Michigan. I was born on a farm just outside of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I came down here in 1941, 42, early 42. Did my basic training over at Fort McClellan, Alabama. Ironically, I enlisted in the Marines and went to Pendleton, California for about 8 weeks. And if you notice, I have two different sized knees here. My right knee was injured pretty badly playing football at Pendleton, California, so they discharged me and sent me home. I came back home, and I was at Ypsilanti, Michigan, looking for a job in a bomber plant. And of course, you're cannon fodder about that time because they were drafting everybody, so I re-enlisted in the Army. I came down to Fort McClellan. I did, I think, about 4 weeks basic training down there. I was a musician, and I played in a band in high school and like that, or played at it. I don't say I was a musician. I played fairly well, but not too good. I had one ironical experience that happened to me at Fort McClellan, Alabama. I didn't know anything about integration when I came down here. Of course, the armies wasn't integrated back in those days. I was listening to the old steel Nissan huts that they used to have, you know, and I heard some guys playing Dixieland music one night. I was in basic, and I walked over there, you know, with my leggings on. I looked like I'd just come out of a rummage sale, you know, nothing fit. You know, when we were in the military to begin with, nothing fit. So I walked over there, and this major was standing at the door, and there was a bunch of black guys in there. I walked up and I said, "Is there any reason why a guy can't come over here and sit in and play with you guys? Because I like that type of music." They were playing Dixieland, you know, blues and things like that. And he looked at me, he said, "Yeah." So I went back, and I sent home, and my grandmother sent my horn down to me then. And I went back 2 or 3 weeks later. I walked in that night, and he told me, he says, "You can't come over here." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "We don't allow white guys in here." So I went back to the barracks, and I thought, well, that's funny. And I thought, why don't they allow the guy? And one of the guys, of course, a southern kid down there, he told me, he says, "Nah," he says, "you don't associate with those people at all." So that broke that up. I left Fort McClellan after basic training, came over to Fort Mack in Atlanta, and I was in S2 over there. I worked in S2 for a while and played in the band over there. And I had a Class A pass. I could go all over Atlanta. I don't think I would have had to leave Fort Mack. We played for red carpet people and this sort of stuff, you know, and in the afternoons, you know, and then reveille in the morning and that sort of stuff. I got sick of playing in the band, so I cut it out. I sent my horn back home, and to this day I haven't touched it since. I didn't want them to find out after I got, you know, when I went into airborne. I was walking along in Atlanta one night, and I saw these two guys coming down the street, and they had these cocky-looking hats on, you know, with a little parachute emblem on the side of it. I didn't know what outfit they were in. They had boots on, you know, and had their pants bloused, and I thought, geez, that's a good-looking couple of guys. So I stopped them and asked them what outfit they were in. They said they were in Paratroops. So I said, geez, Paratroops. I thought, well, what do you do? And he said, well, we're down at Fort Benning, Georgia. We jump out of airplanes down there, and they had their wings on, you know, and like that. So I asked him, I said, how do you get in? He said, you have to volunteer. So I went back to my company commander, which was a guy out of VMI, big, roly-poly captain. I told him, I said, "Captain, I'd like to volunteer for the Paratroops." And he slid down in his chair like that, and he said, "Are you out of your mind?" He said, "Those people jump out of airplanes." And he says, "Not only that," he says, "you're slated to go to OCS anyway." I had signed up to go to OCS, and I was waiting for a class. But he said, "This is a voluntary outfit." He said, "If you volunteer for that," he says, "chances are you'll never go to OCS." Well, I said, "Can I do this?" I said, "Can I let the two, when I signed up, can I let these two things just ride, and I'll take the first one that comes through? In other words, if OCS comes through, I'll take it, and if the paratroop." Well, this was on a Friday afternoon, and guess where I was on Monday morning? I was down at Fort Benning in the Paratroops and in a volunteer outfit. And when they said jump, you said how far. So I went to Benning, and I think when I got through the parachute training down there, I had to turn around, and I don't mean any derogatory disrespect for the Marines or anything like that, but I think I got about as tough a training down there as I would have gotten in the Marines. And it was kind of funny that they discharged me and sent me home with a knee that I thought was in pretty good shape anyway. Well, since then I've made over 300 jumps, so I'm not going to worry too much about my legs. But after I got into the Paratroops, we did our 4-day jumps, and then we did 1-night jump down there. And of course, a lot of guys say, well, you did 5 night jumps anyway, and that, when we talk about that, that means you do your first 5 jumps with your eyes closed. And they call that night jumps, when you're going out with your eyes closed. And most of the time, one of the things most people ask me, they say, well, why did you join the Paratroops? What was the reason for it? Well, I was kind of a street kid when I got out of high school, and I bummed around a little bit, and I was always into something I wanted to do to have a good time and like that. And I think looking at the young kids nowadays, I think a lot of these young fellows nowadays and the young boys and girls I see are really experimental with these things too, and they like this life of having a good time and so on. Well, I did that. I'm not too proud of some of the things that I did coming along like that too, but after I got into the Paratroops, I was sent up to right here in Toccoa, Georgia, up at Currahee Mountain. And we did some training up there where the Milliken plant is right now. We were up there, I think I was there about, probably 4 months, something like that. I was with another parachute outfit up there. The 506 at that time, which is a regiment of the 101st Airborne, had just gone through their basic training up there. They were sent back to Benning, and they were going to do their jumps. I was already a qualified jumper at that time. So when they went overseas, they were sent from there overseas. I was sent from Toccoa. And by the way, if you talk about Toccoa, there's a mountain up there called Currahee Mountain, and that Currahee Mountain is named after my regiment.
Huh.
And I have some things over here that I'll show you that have the little Currahee insignia on them. And when they were sent overseas, they went to England, and I came over right behind them, and I joined the 506, which was formed at Toccoa, Georgia. And they're the ones, the 506, the 2nd Battalion and the 3rd Battalion are the ones that made the force march from Toccoa all the way to Fort Benning. The 2nd Battalion marched from Toccoa to Atlanta, and the 3rd Battalion marched from Atlanta to Benning.
What year would that have been?
40? It was in 1942.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to, what they wanted to do, the Japanese had been bragging about they had a forced march, and we beat them. The time beat them. I wasn't on the march, but they beat them at that time. When they did that march, I can remember when they were going through that. It was in the fall, and there was a sleet. Weather was sleeting, and those guys walked all the way. And I remember when they came into Benning down there, they looked pretty pooped out, but they still came in with their heads up, you know. And the spirit of corps was there. They were helping each other, dragging one another along, and like that. Very, very few people fell out, surprisingly. But to this day, and I look back at some of the veterans that I see at our reunions, that forced march killed a lot of their legs. We can tell from that. And they know it, and I know it. Everywhere we went on the double. We were running all the time. There was just nothing walking. I even do that to this day. I still do it. And when we got overseas, I was stationed in Ramsbury, England, and we were being alerted here and there. You know, we had sand tables put up, and they were talking to us. By the way, Colonel Sink was my regimental commander. General Sink later on. He went to Korea, and I think he was a 2-star general when he retired, and Colonel Sink died. He lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He was probably one of the most impressive generals that I've seen in a long time. I knew him when he was a major. And he was the kind of a guy that he'd bring you in and he would chew you up one side and down the other, and then he'd take out a bottle of whiskey and set it up on the thing and have a drink with him. And then he'd tell you not to do it again, and you damn well better not do it again. And we're not with Colonel Sink around, because he was a character that one of the things that you didn't do in the paratroops was disobey a direct order or refuse to jump. If you did, you were gone. And if you were told that you had to choose a buddy to fight with or something like that, you had to go back to back with him, and you knew that he was as good as you were or better than you were. And that's the way we operated all the time like that. when we got into England, we trained over there out in the field, and I noticed one of the gentlemen here a few minutes ago was talking about digging holes in Georgia clay. They should try digging in the shale that they have in England, and the guys that would get into trouble, we had to dig 6x6s. And that's 6 feet wide, 6 feet deep, 6 feet long. And usually what you had to do when you got through digging it, put your equipment in it, bury it again, and then dig it out if you wanted it. And of course you had to keep your equipment. Well, that was for the real, we say, I excuse the expression, but the real screw-ups that really got into trouble. And I had a thing that myself, everybody asked me, they said, well, how come you were going to OCS and you never got any rank? Well, if they'd had Velcro back in my day, and this is one of the things I'm not too proud of, because I would get made maybe a sergeant one week, we'd go out and celebrate, and boom, you'd be busted the next day. So I think the highest rank I had was a staff sergeant. I think that lasted about 3 weeks. The fellow and I took off, and we decided we were going to have a party, and when we came back, we were both privates. Well, I spent the whole Army working between a private and a PFC, and I came out as a PFC. But anyway, looking at the sand tables and things, they had one part of our regiment was alerted one time to go to Stavanger, Norway. And we were issued white snowsuits. And I think this was a diversion. This was just prior to the invasion of Normandy. And we were in this alerted area, and they had us around. Of course, the Germans knew exactly where we were. When we were going overseas on the ship, we had to unblouse our pants. And of course, we had beveled heels on our boots. And those beveled heels would keep a suspension line or something from catching in that crook of your heel if you happen to go upside down when you come out of an airplane or something like that. But they had, I remember this Axis Sally, she said, we were out about 3 days out, I think, coming into England, into Ireland in that area. And she said, welcome, 101st Airborne Division. And then she started naming people in our outfit that and telling them that our wives were over here shacking up with, and she'd say Navy guys and something like this, you know, and of course to create a dissension between us and the Navy. And this was their psychological warfare that they had with us. Of course, we got a big kick out of it. We laughed. We didn't care. And we had our patches all off and this type of thing. And so when we got to England, of course, we put our patches back on, and then we started. Well, most of us weren't married, so we could date the gals over there, and we would go to the dances and go to London and places like that. They were pretty free with us. We had a pretty good time. One of the things that we had over there in England, I remember, was the beer they had. We never could fathom that beer. They don't know what ice is. They didn't then. They do now. And we used to take the beer, and we'd take a shot of gin and put it in it. And the British thought we were crazy when we did that. And one of the best drinks I think they had was raisin wine. Guys would go out, they'd get raisin wine, and we called it the courting wine and fighting wine. They were two different kinds that they had. They alerted us to go to Normandy, and when we really found out, it was early in the spring, and then we were sent down to Exeter, England, and we were put in a quarantined area down there. And we went down one time, and then they took us off of alert and sent us back to our regular home bases around Ramsbury, Marlborough, Swindon, in that area in England, in central England. Then we went back down there on alert, and this was along in the middle of May, if I remember right. And then we knew that this thing was going to get pretty serious. So we had Colonel Wharton at that time Bob Wolverton happened to be our regimental commander. He was a roly-poly Irish guy and real tough and a decent man to get along with. But I remember the night before we went into Normandy, he came out. We had a big mound of dirt where the officers used to go and critique us. They'd critique us on what was going on and so on. But in this area where we were all fenced in. We couldn't get out at all. We had straight-leg guards walking around us. When I say straight-leg guards, I'm talking about regular Army people walking guard around us so we couldn't get out. If you know paratroops, they're going to find a way to get out if they can. They're going to go out. And some of the guys did. Some of the guys got out. They'd go out and they'd bring back chickens, and they'd bring back eggs, and they'd bring back everything else and smuggle it into us. And all we spent our time doing was cleaning our weapons, sharpening knives, and we carried a knife in our jumpsuits up here. We carried a switchblade up here, and then we carried a leg knife down here in our legs, in our boot down here like this. And these were just for close-in fighting if we got into personal, hand-to-hand combat and that type of thing. But anyway, during this, I remember the night before Normandy particularly, Colonel Wharton came out, and he said, he got up on this mound, And he gave, I think, probably one of the most heart-rendering prayers, and I can't recite it. I can't remember it exactly how it went, but anyway, he gave this heart-rendering prayer, and he said there's going to be, and the day before Eisenhower had been there too, and Eisenhower stood up on this mound, and he told us, he said, I'm sorry to tell you fellas, but he says 80% of you aren't going to come back. And we all stood there and looked, and we expected that. We were volunteers. We expected it. But when Wharton got up there that night and gave that prayer, that woke a lot of guys up. They said, man, this is it. We're going now. So that was late in the afternoon. And one of the things that Wharton said, and being in the paratroops, it's kind of, you get a little risque once in a while. But Wharton, the last thing he said, when you guys land in Normandy tonight or tomorrow morning, he said, I want you, if you can't eat it or you can't have sex with it, shoot it. And that was one of the things I remember the guy saying, and I always remember him. When we took off that night, I remember the planes we were taxiing out. We had so much equipment on. I had a leg pack that weighed probably 110 pounds, and I weighed at that time probably 140 pounds. I had a musette bag underneath my reserve chute, and I had my main chute on the back. I carried a Tommy gun, and I had the Tommy gun lying across my reserve chute, and we were jumping at about 600 feet, which a reserve chute takes 400 feet to open anyway. When you pull it, well, if you oscillate one time, you're on the ground. And if your main chute doesn't function, and in a combat situation, you might just well throw that reserve away. The British got so they didn't use reserves. I jumped for the British one time out of a Wellington bomber. They had a hole about so big around, and we'd scoot along on our seat ends and disappear out that hole. We didn't use a reserve because you couldn't go through that hole with the reserve on. So the British didn't use reserves. And they still don't today, I don't believe. But anyway, I remember taking off that night and getting ready to, when we got in the planes, helping boost the guys up. To get into a C-47 is pretty hard to get in. It's especially a little short guy, and you got all this equipment on. You walk. You don't walk, you waddle like this. You walk like you done messed your pants or something, you just can't walk. But anyway, we got in the planes, and we were all put in and everything. We had a lot of guys that, when the plane started to move, they got seasick, or air sick. And they'd throw up on the floor, and the smell of it and so on. Then they close the doors, and then you skate out the door when they open them. That's what we used to say, skate out the door. I remember one fellow that always got air sick when we made our jumps in England at night. We used to jump a lot at night in England. You couldn't, and we'd come down in trees, chicken coops, and everything else. But this guy would always get sick. And I remember he was always embarrassed about throwing up, so he took his helmet off. And you have a helmet liner. And the guy sat there and he was getting green around the gills, and all of a sudden he threw up in his helmet. Well, about that time, the door opened and we were on red light, and we'd gone over the channel, and when that red light came on, we knew it wasn't going to be but just maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, and we were going to jump. Well, he grabbed his helmet and he put it on, and of course the vomit went down all over his face and all over him and everything, and here we are trying to get up. The first thing I remember about seeing France the first time was tracer bullets. And one of the guys sitting next to me, he said, he said, that doesn't look too bad. And of course there were a million tracer bullets coming up. And the guy knew better than what he said. He says, look at those tracer bullets. He says, there's one here and one there. And I said, yeah, but there's about 15 bullets in between each one of those two. I think he was kidding when he said that. That's the way we were in the plane going over there. I was looking out the door and I thought, gee, this is going to be duck soup. Well, the plane I was in, was hit. And the guy, he took real hard evasive action, and then he leveled off, and the first stick went out. And the first stick of guys was probably about 12 or 14 guys that went out. My stick came around when it came time for us to go out, and I was the last guy out in the plane. I had to get everybody else out and get them out of the plane to go. When I finally jumped, I was about 30 miles away from the drop zone. Our plane had taken evasive action, gone out over the channel, and it turned to come back in, and it came back in over Point de Hope. And I remember when the guy told us, he said, we were down on the deck, and the crew chief says, when we climb, he said, we're going to climb up, and he said, we're going to give you the green light to go. He said, we don't know where in the devil you are. So when we went out the door, I made contact after that with three other guys. There was a guy by the name of Jack Manley, and Jack lives in Slidell, Louisiana, and he and I are still good friends. And there was another guy by the name of Rennick. Rennick is dead now, but Rennick saved his M1 for some reason or other. I landed in the water. Jack and I both landed in the water. Jack lost his equipment and I lost mine. When we came out the next morning to look for our equipment, the Krauts had a better idea than we did. They were zeroed in on it, and they were waiting for us to come back to get it. I landed in about 8 feet of water, and I took my knife out of my boot to cut some of my equipment loose. And you know, your quick releases never work when you want them to work. If anything mechanical, you can count on it not working. So I started to cut some of my equipment loose, and I began to move. And I thought, geez, and I was underwater at that time, and I thought, I wonder what that is. And I thought, gee, the Krauts have got me now for sure, you know, and I thought they had the chute and was pulling it. My chute had blossomed out on top of the water, and the little breeze was pulling me along and dragging me, and the next thing I know, I was lying on my back like this, and I could breathe. I thought, well, if I move, I'll sink again. So I was lying there, and I thought, gee, then I stuck my foot down kind of, and I felt kind of solid ground. So then I moved a little bit, and I turned over, and I remember looking to see what happened to that, what was happening, the reason I was being pulled, and I could see that chute was still, it had a little air in it, and was still pulling on me. Well, then I knew I was safe then, so I figured, well, I'll get out of my equipment. So I left my chute and stuff there, and I kind of covered it up like. I got up into a hedgerow, and I thought, well, I'll look around and see if I can find some of the other guys. And at that time, and if you excuse me a second, at that time we had what we call crickets. We would do this. These are not original. This is not an original cricket. They look like regular little crickets that the kids used to have. And what I would do, I'd flick it, and then if the person challenging me would come back with, he'd come back with 2. Then I gave him 1, and we'd know we were okay. Well, it wasn't long. The Krauts they got the same idea. They could do that with their rifles that they had. They had an old like our Enfield rifles that had bolt action. They could do that with a bolt on their rifles. And they got so they could do it, and we got wise to that. So what we would do after they got wise to that, we would do this. We would take that thing and we'd muffle it. And then they couldn't muffle it, see? Or we would do this sometimes with it. If a guy knew you were going to do it, you could make it, the ones we had would sing. And we'd do that. And they would pick that up, and then we'd know we had the right challenge and so on. But anyway, I spent well, Jack and I got together, and this guy Rennick, and Rennick had the rifle, and of course the rifle proved to be the detriment of all of us. I went back the next morning and tried to get my equipment out, and I saw this Kraut patrol was looking for us. They knew we were in that area, and they were looking for us, and when I got out there, of course they started sniping at us, and they started spreading out, and I told the other 2 guys that was with me, I said, we better get out of here, because I said it's better to live to fight than it is to get captured. So Rennick decided that he'd go up on a bridge and take a shot at him. Well, Rennick got up there, and I heard him bang, 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 bang a couple of times, and Jack and I took off in another direction, and we never saw Rennick after that. And I think Rennick was captured, and he was sent to one of the Stalags. I don't remember exactly where, but anyway, he died later on here in the United States. He died of diabetes. He was a heavy drinker after he got back. But Jack and I stayed together. We got into this farmhouse, and there was a French family there, and there were 2 little girls, about 10, 11 years old, and of course we lost all of our equipment. We didn't have anything to eat. We hadn't had a darn thing to eat. So I took one of the little girls, and Grand Camp, France wasn't too far from where we were. They told us where we were. They were on our side, but I didn't trust them. And neither one of us trusted them, so I told the girl, I said, you can go to town, and they didn't have anything to eat either. So we sent her to town with some of our money, our invasion money, to get some bread. And she came back with 2 loaves of bread about this big around, and it looked like whole wheat bread, except you could use it for a hockey puck. It looked like a big football, and it was the best that we put in our mouth in about 3 days. And they gave us that. Of course, they always had wine and Calvados. The French always had that, but you don't drink Calvados on an empty stomach. You only do it one time. If you do, it just seems to burn a hole right through you. So I went back in 1958. I went back to France, and I tried to look up that family, and I couldn't find them. I never had been able to find out where that family was and who those 2 little girls were. But later on, Jack and I joined up with the 2nd Ranger Battalion right behind Point de Houx. And when we got in, when we were working our way towards Point de Houx, the Germans had dug in, and they dug in like moles. And you'd see them pop out of like a sewer hole. They'd come up and stick their heads up, and they'd duck down. Next thing you know, they'd be sticking a head up over here. They had these manhole covers, like they'd come out and stick their heads out. They had that place so well fortified in there. I don't know how the devil the Rangers happened to come up over that place. I've never been able to figure out how the heck they came over there. That was a most miserable place in the world to come up over. But some of our paratroops, the 501, had landed in the ocean right out close to us, and Jack and I could see some of the guys down there. We could see the crowds. This was up on a bluff like where we were. We could see the crowds down there, had them as captive. Some of our paratroops, we could see they were paratroops. I didn't know at the time who they were, but they were 501. One of the guys that was in the 501 joined up too with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. He landed in the water, in the ocean actually, in the channel. And a guy by the name of Lenny Goodgall from New York. He's up in the New York area. He's still alive. And I didn't know Lenny at the time, but anyway, he came up over the cliffs with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And when he came over the cliffs with them, I saw this guy this paratroop with a chunk shot out of the side of his helmet. And he was crazy. I mean, he was just wild. Well, I thought, well, there's a typical paratroop. He's wild. But anyway, we joined up, and I didn't see Lenny after that. I think he was wounded, and he was evacuated out. But anyway, about a year ago, I was at one of our reunions, and we were sitting on a bed, all of us talking, and this guy was sitting there, you know, and I didn't know who he was. I happened to mention that I was behind Point de Houx, and he said, you know, he said, I fought with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I asked him, I said, well, did you come over the cliffs with them? And he said, I sure did. So, and I said, did you have a chunk shot out of your helmet? He said, yeah. And he said, and I was wild. He said, I didn't know where I was. And he said, they evacuated me back to England. So I said, well, you were the guy. And I described to him, I said, you were the guy. And we were talking about it. And I said, you remember Jack Manley? And he said, sure, I remember Jack. He said, I remember Jack. And he said, I don't particularly remember you as much as I do Jack. But he says, Jack was on top of a tank up there looking for souvenirs. And this Ranger Sergeant told him to get the hell off of there and get down and get to fighting with the rest of us. And but anyway, we went on back towards Signy, France with the Ranger Battalion, and then we finally contacted the division. At first, the Rangers didn't know us. They weren't sure who we were. They had us like this for a few hours. They thought we were Krauts, and so they interviewed us, and I told them who we were, and we finally convinced them, and they contacted division, and I joined division. And this was late in June, and it had gone on into July. We went on into July. We did a lot of patrol work in Normandy like that. But I know they told us before we went into Normandy that the first 10 hours that we were in there, that if we didn't make it and we didn't hold to get these other troops coming in over Omaha and Utah Beach, that we were doomed. There was no way they were going to get us out of there. Well, knowing that we were volunteers, and it wasn't anything new to us to be behind the lines, because we knew that's where we were going to be. But anyway, after that, we went back to England. We regrouped in England, of course, out of my platoon that I was in, there were 53 of us, I think, in that platoon, and 11 of us came back alive. I came out of Normandy without a scratch. I didn't even get a scratch in Normandy. The only thing I did in Normandy was I almost cut this finger off trying to get out of my equipment, and that was the only scratch I got. Jack broke his ankle. He had a broken ankle, and that healed. We came back to England, and we were regrouping then with a lot of replacements. And by the way, I got to admire the replacements, because they came in, young kids that was younger than I was, and at that time, and they were as gung-ho as we were. They joined up with us right away on September 17th. We went right straight into Holland. We made the re-invasion of Holland. The invasion of Holland. And I lasted about 4 days in Holland. We were coming into Eindhoven, Holland, and I remember guys were getting hit, and we couldn't figure out how they were getting hit so close to the ground. And I was in a kind of a ditch like, maybe 3 or 4 feet deep, and I was kneeling down, and I saw a bullet hit the bank, and it ricocheted by me and hit the bank over here. And I hollered at some of the guys, and I said, hey, that guy's got to be shooting from the ground somewhere. Well, there was a culvert under a road. And this German paratrooper had landed in there in the middle of the night, a group of them. Of course, we captured a bunch of them in there, but he was lying in that culvert. Well, about the time I hollered, he hit me right in the knee, right here, and it went all the way in here and went up into my hip. And that, of course, put me out of action there. They sent me back to an aid station. I was evacuated back to England, and I stayed in England about 30 days. Then I was sent back to Morne-Malone, France, and I joined the outfit. This was in late November. Well, being wounded, coming out of a hospital and so on, they gave us, and Jack's ankle had healed up then, so Jack and another guy and I decided we'd go to Paris. Paris had been liberated then, so we were at Morne-Malone, France. So we took a 3-day pass, and we went to Paris, and we no more got into Paris. We'd been there about 10, 12 hours, and here the MPs coming around with the bullhorns, 101st Airborne, immediately report back to your outfit. So we go, what the hell's going on? You know, we didn't read any, we couldn't read the French papers anyway. But the Germans were headed for Bastogne, and they were breaking through there at that time. So we beat it back to Morne-Malone, and I got into Morne-Malone with a Class A uniform on and these boots right here in the middle of the winter. And you have no idea how cold these things can get if you got just a light pair of socks like these on, and a Class A uniform. Well, they had taken our duffel bag and they loaded them on these cattle trucks. And this was early in the morning when Jack and I and Herb Spence got back together, all three of us. We jumped on these big long cattle trucks and they headed out. And we had no idea where we were going. We didn't have any idea. Those trucks drove, the black guys, the Red Ball Express drove us in there. And they were great. Those guys, one of the Red Ball guys told me one time, he said, one of the things I hated about driving Red Ball, especially if they said we were being alerted to drive airborne, he said, we knew you guys were going into combat and we were going with you. And he said, I didn't like that particularly. And I wish I'd have gotten the guy's name and could have corresponded with him. But he did a beautiful job of driving. One of our trucks in the middle of the night hit a house and went through a house. And of course it blocked the road. The roads were covered with ice and snow and cold. It was cold as a devil. We didn't have any tops on those trucks. And it was just like when I say a cattle truck, that's what it was. It had those sideboards about 4 feet high, and you were jammed in there like sardines. You could barely sit down. And of course, they just threw our equipment together. All we had was just thrown on the trucks, and we had to just take our pick of things. And we went on into a place called Champs. Well, that night when that truck hit the house, they told us to get off of the truck and to find us some places to sleep. Well, this guy, there were three of us, went into this house, kicked the door open and went in. These were Belgian people then. And we went into this place and told them, get out. We were going to stay here. So they left and we went in. And first time I'd ever run in one of those great big feathered chicks that they had, you know, that they roll all up in to sleep in. Boy, we got into those. And that's the first time I'd had any decent sleep in, I think, 3 years since I'd been in the military. And we stayed there that night, and the next day they took us on into Champs. And we got off the trucks. And we started marching. Already we could hear the shells already coming in. We could hear tanks, and hear the German 88s. You know, you hear them load them even, and they slam the shells into them, and then they clank them shut, and then all of a sudden you hear something go snap, and then boom, bang, and you hear that. They would shoot one of those 88s at one person. They'd shoot it just like a rifle. Well, we got into Bastogne, and when we were going through Bastogne, the best place to get was out of Bastogne, because they were just bombing the devil out of Bastogne, and they were coming in there from all directions because they had us surrounded. And Bastogne sets down in kind of a defilade like. It's not too low in there, but it's surrounded by hills and a lot of trees. And the snow and the pine trees, it was beautiful in the wintertime, but it was deadening. The sound was so deadening that you actually couldn't hear. And sometimes we would be, you would hear movement, or even on a patrol, we could get within 6 or 8 feet of a German soldier, and they could do the same thing, and not even know we were there because of the deadening of this sound. And I know when the food and things and the ammunition, we just didn't have it. We were running out of ammunition. We would dig foxholes, and I noticed one of the fellows a few minutes ago, I think Mr. Ettinger, said that they were shooting airbursts, what we called airbursts, and they'd hit above us. So we'd dig our foxholes. We'd find a tree somewhere, and if you've ever dug a foxhole or tried to dig a stump out, you know how tough it is to dig a stump out, and especially if it's frozen. We would dig down under these roots of the trees, and if a shell would hit, then you'd be pretty well protected. Of course, we would cut pine boughs and things and put over our hole. I remember one time we had one hole, we called it a dormitory. The guys all got together and we dug one big one. So we had and if you've ever seen a beaver or an animal slide through the snow on their stomach, you know, they'll slide along, and the next thing you know, they go into a hole. One of the ironical things, I thought it was real funny, this lieutenant we had, we called him Pinky, because he had little pink ears, you know. And we got into a mortar barrage, so he made a dive for our hole, and we had that thing where you could run and dive on your stomach and bank and slide right into it. See, well, he made a mistake of diving in there first. Of course, he had about 10 guys come right in on top of him, and he was down in there hollering and screaming, get off, I'm smothering, I'm smothering. And we was laying up there, we don't care if you do smother, you know, we're not going to get killed just because of you. And I thought that was kind of funny. Being surrounded in Bastogne, everybody asked the question, said, how did you feel when you were surrounded there? I never felt any different than I did any other time when you were in combat. You knew they were behind you, they were on this side of you, and they were above you and below you and everywhere else. So you just had to cover your back, and everybody else was covering yours, and you were covering theirs, and you just worked together like that. General McAuliffe came out, and along about the 25th or 24th or 25th, I think he gave them the ultimatum that we weren't going to surrender, and he told them nuts. And that was the big thing when McAuliffe said nuts. And the Germans didn't know what he meant. So they went back and they told, I think the Krauts went back, and the story was that when they got back, they said, the man says nuts. And of course it took them some time to decipher what he was talking about. But I remember the captives that we had, some of the captured people that we had in Bastogne would ask us, say, don't you people have something to know you're beat, you're surrounded, you're beat? And we used to tell them, we're beat, you're a captive. You're our captive. What do you mean we're beat? So, and we used to tell them this, if they surround us and they start killing us in here, we're going to kill you. And starting all the way back to Normandy, when we were in Normandy, we didn't take any prisoners. And I didn't have a chance to take any myself anyway because I was so far away from the outfit. But none of the guys there, and they used to call us baggy pants butchers.
Uh-huh.
And that was one of the things that we had that got attached to us at that time. And we had no idea, no idea at all that we were going to surrender. I went on after the war when I came back and went on down into Austria, and when we were going down through Hürtgen Forest, I got hit by a German kid, about 11 years old, shot me in the leg right here with a wooden bullet. And that bullet spread out. I was sent back and evacuated then, and they were going to amputate my leg. I was sent back to Soissons, France, and I had a terrible fever. I was poisoned, actually, is what it was. And they told me this, that we'll amputate your leg. And the guy said, if we can save it, we will. Well, the fever went down, and they saved my leg. And at the same time, the guy took this bullet that had been in my hip all that time. He took it out. And he saw on my dog tags that I was from Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he was a doctor from Kalamazoo. And I didn't know the guy, and I still don't know who he was to this day. He took the bullet out of my leg and he put it in a little, like a Bull Durham sack, you know, the tobacco sack, and he put a little note in there, and he said, I got the bullet out of your leg, and he said, I think you'll be okay. And he put the bullet in a little note and left it, and didn't give me his name, and he was a captain or a major, and I would like to know the guy's name.
Mr. Dunning, can I call a brief halt and ask that we get back together and do this some more?
Sure.
Because I want to get this gentleman on tape before.
My pleasure.
Because I want to thank you for this as well, because this is an immense story. I mean, that's why we're doing what we're doing. So I'd like to meet with you again, sir, and call you up. I think I've got your phone number on here on this release form, and to make another date and to do part 2 of this.
Okay, that'd be fine with me.
And thank you very much, Mr. Robert Dunning.
Yes. Well, everybody calls me Bob.
Bob Dunning.
Bob. Sometimes they call me Robbie, Bob or Robbie, either one. Most of the time, Bob. By the way, I'm a graduate from the University of Georgia. I came down here after the war, and I graduated from the University of Georgia. I taught school in Atlanta for almost 30 years, and I was a school principal, elementary principal there, and we bought property up here on the lake, and that's how I happened to be in Hart County.
Well, I need to hear about all of that, but I'm going to pause this for now.
I'm up with that. Well, are you familiar with Mr. Martin over in Carnegie?
Yeah.
You know him?
Yeah, I know of him.
He's a jumper, but of a different war.
Yeah,
Yeah, him and I are good friends.
He's younger than I am.
Oh, well, yeah, he was in Vietnam. But he's got the airborne stuff up.
Here's a picture of, this is
Bring that a little closer.
Jack Manley, the guy that I was talking about, and this is myself, and this is Baker, and I can't remember his first name. I think his name was Gene Baker. We're trying to locate him. I know he's still alive. But this was right after Bastogne, right after we came out of Bastogne. We were back in Wharton, France at that time. And Jack was healed up, I was healed up. You can see our old jumpsuits and stuff that we had on. We still look pretty grungy. And I think we've been out of Bastogne maybe, probably a month or two, something like that. But anyway, this is Jack, myself, and Eugene Baker.
Got it. Thank you very much.